Hello and welcome to tonight's live from Ian's studio. Hope the sound's coming through loud and clear. I've made a few adjustments to how my sound is delivered to try and solve the problem where the played-in videos had a much louder volume than the live sound. So do let me know tonight how everything sounds, and make sure that I'm not buzzing because I've taken the levels up too high or anything like that. So welcome to the show, folks. It's great to be back with you again for another week. If you are new to the show, tuning in for the first time, welcome. Do say hi in the live chat if you haven't done so already. Notice a couple of extra names appearing in there since I was doing my my welcome in the chat. Loz, hi, nice to have you here with us, and Peter Stanford as well. Thank you. So good. Right. So let's get started with the show. For information for those who are new to the show, and I know there may be one or two people who will be tuning in, not necessarily live, but maybe on the recorded version this week. So I'm afraid those who've heard me say this before, really sorry, but I do need to go through it again. These are weekly shows every Sunday night at 7:30, and they remain on YouTube for a while, and then I'm doing cut down versions, putting the full version into my academy. But here's the interesting thing now. The extracts are now going to be split across 3 different YouTube channels. Last week I announced my new Lightroom channel, and that's where all my Lightroom training is going to go. So things like the 3-minute edits, they'll be still here on the live stream, but when I extract them and make them videos in their own right, I won't be posting them to this channel. I will be posting them to my Lightroom channel. So that's where you'll need to go to find all the past ones as I upload them on there. And the next thing to say is about asking questions. Do ask questions in the chat. I can see Gary is already ahead of the game on this and has asked the first question for the Q&A session in there regarding the MIDI board and Lightroom. Yep, I'll talk about that later. I'll talk about it briefly later in the Q&A, but that's probably a good one for me to bring in 2 weeks' time when I come back to Lightroom. I was thinking of doing it last week, and I realized I'd probably got enough already, and as it turned out, I'd already got twice as much as I needed last week, which is why I'm having to do a second Lightroom specific show in a couple of weeks' time. So I will talk about that very briefly later, and perhaps go into a bit more detail about it when I come back to Lightroom and try and explain and show how that all works on there. Yeah, if you're watching this on the replay, then please put comments in the comments for that. Let me know you've been watching it. This is one of the things that I'd love to know who watches on the replay, because I know people are, because I can look at the stats, but I don't know who you are. So please say hi in the comments so that I know. It will just help me to know who the audience is, and if you're someone I already know, it gives me an idea of where to pitch this. So it really is helpful to know who's here. Yeah, the usual way to help me with this is please subscribe if you haven't done so. Subscribe to the channel. Put comments on my videos, not just this, but any of my videos on any of the 3 channels, because that will help me get the channels noticed by YouTube, because it ain't happening at the moment. It's I'm really struggling with getting the channel to be found by people, and that's simply because there are so many people who've already got established photography-based channels that the way the algorithm works is the more subscribers you've got, the more they will promote you. you get subscribers by the more you're promoted. So it's really tough to break through there. So comments is one of the things they say, oh, there's people interested in this, and therefore it just moves it up slightly, moves the needle slightly on whether they promote my stuff. So that would be really helpful as well on there. And like the videos as well. Again, that interactions helps me. So I can see 8 of you have already liked the live stream tonight. I've got 14 concurrent viewers at the moment, so the remaining 6 of you, go and hit the like button. You've got no excuses, go and hit it on there. Right, and I've just seen in the chat, in answer to one of my questions, that Loz and Kev sometimes watch on replay if they missed it live. That's good to know. Thanks for saying that on there. So, as we're having, I was teasing a couple of people in the chat before we started, and for those who may not know, the live chat that goes alongside this, I'm not active in there until the slideshow is showing. So if ever you see me in there and my slideshow countdown's not showing, then do scream. It means something's gone wrong. But I try to get that going 20 minutes, quarter of an hour beforehand. And we're getting a nice little group of people chatting in there, because as you can imagine, it's quite tricky for me to be responding to the chat as well as talking to camera, controlling the various other things which are going on here. So once we go live, I'm sort of on the fringes of the chat, and I only tend to post when there's a video playing in. But I get to chat to people at that point. So if you are around early, it does go on for a while. And we're getting a nice little group of people chatting in there. And the challenge, folks, is to be the first in the chat next week before Peter, because he's been consistently in there even before I've managed to get in there the last few weeks. So try and beat him on that next week if you can. Right, yeah, I'm still looking for volunteers for the showcase and the 3-minute edits on there. I was teasing people about the 3-minute edits. I'm chasing Tim for a couple, and it'd be great to have one from Andy. He's been posting some fantastic images in the Facebook group, particularly over the last week. So I'd love to do one of your images, Andy, for the 3-minute challenge. Because I'm really enjoying the stuff that you're posting there. So let's have a look at some of that. Yeah, talking about the Facebook group, the link's on the screen behind me. It should be down in the description below. And that's where the conversation carries on during the week, people sharing images on there. I will answer some questions on there. Some I'll reserve for the live stream. My way of getting people to come and watch. On that, but also please share your images. I do set a theme each week based on what the live stream is going to be about. So if you've got something on that theme, feel free to post it, but don't restrict yourself to there. You feel free to post on other themes as well if you want. If you just want feedback on something, I noticed 1 or 2 people have been doing that. One I've picked up on and I'm going to talk about as part of the live stream. On there, and it's a place where I keep people up to date on what's happening, both with my photography in general, the YouTube channel, etc., as well as this. I also have a weekly newsletter that goes out. It was a bit late today going out, and it was a rather short one, but normally it's links to events, things going on in the studio. When I finally get out of lockdown, which hopefully will be after this week. I've got my first portrait session in the studio this coming week, so I'm looking forward to it. Also a little bit worried. It's really the first time I've picked up the camera in anger for months, so we'll see how that goes. And I've got a model shoot, just myself and the model, scheduled for the 1st of August. Again, trying to get myself back into shooting, working out the logistics of keeping the place COVID safe. So things are happening, and I will be advertising perhaps 1 or 2 events coming up as well. I've I'm getting my head around that now with there. If you want to subscribe to the newsletter, the link's down below in the description. It's up on my website, so have a look on that. So what have we got this week? We've got a very brief news section. Our theme is all about lenses. So we're going to start looking at what is focal length and crop factor. Now, these two sections are going to be a little bit more biased towards the beginners. I know we have one or two people watching the stream who are perhaps towards the earlier end of their photography journey. So I do want to mix in a few of the beginner level stuff in the stream. So that's what I'm doing tonight. So the rest of you who know it already, then please bear with me on that, because I do want to try and serve everyone who tunes in for the live stream. We've got the 3-minute challenge, of course, always there, and a section I've called it here, the right lens for the right job. It's basically just going through what focal lengths are appropriate for what types of photography, or what they're best suited for. And again, it's just to help people, because one of the questions I often get asked is, somebody says to me, I'm thinking of getting a second lens for my camera, and what should I get? And it's the impossible question to answer, because unless you know what type of photography somebody wants to do, then you can't really say. And this gives an idea of what type of lenses work best for what types of photography, just to sort of help people make that sort of decision. So I want to cover that. I've got a nice section on your images, so thank you to everyone who's been posting in the Facebook group this week. Some cracking images there, and I've picked out some of my favorites again to share with you and talk about. We've got the live Q&A. I've got one image in particular I'm going to do a feedback session on, that a new member of the Facebook group posted this week. Now, I think he's probably going to be watching on the replay rather than live, because I know he's traveling at the moment, but I promised I'd give him some feedback on an image as part of the show tonight. So what's happening in the news? Well, the biggest news for me is that announcement I made last week, these 3 linked YouTube channels. And just to sort of let you know where the emphasis is going to be for these channels. And I've done this for multiple reasons, partly because I want to try and grow the channels, and I've been told by all the YouTube gurus that you've got to be really focused in, niched down on your channel, and my channel was way too broad. So this is how it all breaks down. The Ian Studio channel, which we're on now with the live stream, that I am targeting enthusiasts, people who perhaps already have the gear or aspire to have the gear and want to know how to use it or to improve on it. So I'll be covering things like studio photography in there, portraiture, things where you're using not necessarily just the camera. It may be camera and tripod, it may be camera and external flash and things like that. So that's for the enthusiasts. That's the enthusiast channel. The travel photography channel, I'm aiming that a bit more towards the beginner on there. So if you are at the earlier stages of your journey, that's probably the channel to go and subscribe to. Feel free to subscribe to all of them. I'd love you to them, but that's probably the one, because when we start out in our photographic journey, I think the majority of us start out by taking holiday snaps, and it grows from there. So the travel photography one is a good lead in. I'll be talking about techniques on there at the more beginner level on that. Plus I'll be sharing my travel logs, which are very photographic based. It's all about photographing different locations on my travel log. So you'll pick up tips on composition and things like that through those. So that's the travel photography channel. And then there's this third one that I've just started, the Lightroom one, Learn Lightroom I've called it. And that's all about post-production. It's not exclusively Lightroom, but I would imagine it'll be 95% Lightroom, 90% Lightroom, something like that. And I wanted to separate that off into its own channel, because I had the dilemma there. Where do I put the Lightroom ones? Do I put them in the Enthusiasts in Studio channel, or do I put them in the Beginners Travel Photography one? And I thought, well, do I split them across? I thought, well, no, it probably makes more sense have its own channel, because I know there's quite a few of you on here who aren't Lightroom users. And it seems shame to be filling up those channels with stuff that's not relevant to you. So if you're not a Lightroom user and that's of no interest to you, just don't subscribe to the Learn Lightroom one. If you are a Lightroom user, please go and subscribe to it. There are links on my In Studio channel. I will put the links down in the description below. I realized just before I was coming on air that I hadn't put them in there ready for this. So it's easy enough to find. If you've signed up for my newsletter, you've got the links already, but they're in the side margin of the main channel for In Studio. So it'd be great to have you have you sign up for those. So what else is happening in the news? Well, I've only got one industry news item this week, and this is something that Rick Bradbury pointed me to. Pixar Pro, Essential Photo have got a sale on at the moment, and in particular the Pico 200 Pro flash unit, mobile flash unit. Apparently it's a very, very good price according to Rick on there. So I wanted to draw it to your attention. There is a link to that down below in the description. That isn't an affiliate link. I have no affiliation with them. It's just I looked at it and thought, if I hadn't got so many other big purchases on the horizon, then I'd have been looking for one of these as well. I'm quite impressed with it, and I'm trying to borrow one off Rick. Unfortunately, he doesn't have the Pro, so I'm probably going to be borrowing the Pico 200, the standard one, in the next couple of weeks to have a play with, because I'm quite interested in this. So anyway, I wanted to mention it to say it's on sale at the moment. If you were thinking of buying one, they're at a really good price at present. Right, okay, Q&A. I'm going to have a look through the chat. I've been seeing out of the corner of my eye various things scrolling up there, and try and deal with some of these. Right, the first question I've seen come in is from Gary Platt, and this is the one that I was going to talk about. He asks, do I find the MIDI board helpful with Lightroom? Right, let me just explain what this is for anyone who doesn't know. The MIDI board is a little MIDI controller sound thing, but there is a program called MIDI 2, letter 2, I'll get it the right way around, MIDI 2 LR, which is a free bit of software which allows you to program that to do various functions, and the dials on it you can control your sliders with, and it's brilliant. I find it really, really helpful. I have mine set up at home. When I do that Lightroom session, I'll bring it in. I don't know whether I will be able to show you it in action live, but at least I can hold it up to the camera so you can see how sort of a little bit more about how it works. But I do find it a real time saver. But you've got to invest the time up front to do the programming of it, and to assign the different keys and the different buttons and the different dials to what you want Lightroom to do on there. And there is a bit of a learning curve on that, because it's not always as straightforward as you might think. And any of you who are friends with Terry McNamara, you might have seen there was a little exchange between myself and him on Facebook this week. He's been using one and he was having some trouble with it, and in the end we ended up speaking on the phone to try and solve it. And there was just a couple of things that, for example, the case of a letter made a difference as to whether it works. So there's a bit of a learning curve up front, but once it's set up, it's brilliant and it can really speed things up. And what I've done at home is I've actually built a stand for mine, so it sits above my keyboard like this, so that I can control typing here. And if I want to edit an image and change that, I've got my dials up here to be able to control it on there. If I've got a big editing session, I take it off its stand, move it in front of the keyboard, and I can work with it down here. So I've got a really nice setup with it, so I'd be lost without it. And when I go traveling, it goes with me. So I thoroughly recommend it. I will do, on one of these sessions, I'll do a little bit more in detail about how they work, get a camera on it so people can see it in action and things like that. Right, let me have a look. What other questions have we got in? Right, do I find that useful? Yes, I do. Kev saying he's interested, but because he's been having problems with LoopDeck. Right. Oh yes, and Gary says, tell me what the problems are with LoopDeck. Yeah, that's interesting. Let's have a look. Kev says it keeps crashing, narrowed it down to the driver, and decided it would, conflict between the tablet and LoopDeck. Yeah, yeah, I can't offer any advice on that, I'm afraid, Kev. I haven't got either of those. I have a Wacom tablet, but not anything with that. The other thing, the difference between using the MIDI controller and the LoopDeck is, from what I've seen, I don't think the LoopDeck is quite as flexible as using a MIDI controller, and the MIDI controller is a lot cheaper, an awful lot cheaper than a LoopDeck, but you've got that big learning curve at the front with it. Whereas a LoopDeck, it's correct me if I'm wrong, Kev, but it's more or less a plug and play system with that. Right, let's see what other questions I got through. Gary wanting to know just how mobile the Pico 200 Pro is. From what I understand from Rick, having never used one myself, I believe it's very mobile. It's a rechargeable battery on there. So it's designed to be used out in the field as well as in the studio and things like that. Yeah, I think the answer is very mobile. Right, it comes with two heads. What circumstances would you use one over the other? That's a good question, Terry. I don't know the answer to that myself. I can probably hazard a guess, but I'd only be guessing on it, having never used it. It's certainly one of the questions I'm planning to ask Rick, and if I do this video as I'm planning, that was going to be, I won't say question number one, but it's going to be pretty high up there to get that information on there. So what else have we got coming in? Good grief, you're typing quicker than I can read, folks. Keep it up. Right, Gary asking, back to the MIDI board, how expensive is a basic MIDI board? Mine cost, I think it was about £80 or £90. Might be slightly less than that off Amazon, and mine was a Behringer. The Behringer, light, can't remember the full name of it, but it's, if you do any search on MIDI 2LR, it's the one that comes up. It's an oblong one, a whole load of sliders, 2 rows of buttons, 2 rows of buttons, a row of dials across the top, and 1 slider at the side on there. And it's you'll know which one it is. I'll try and find the link, and when I'm covering it on here, I'll be able to talk a little bit more about that one. Michael's saying £35 last time he looked. They've dropped in price then on that. Kev's done a couple of streams about the Pico 200s on there. Right, and Terry's saying you can use an iPad as a MIDI board. I'd heard that, never tried it. I have my iPad doing so many things. I don't think I want to try and get it doing MIDI board as well at the moment on there. On that. And right, Dimitri. Hi, Dimitri. I didn't see you in the chat earlier. Talking about KevPack having a great video on the Pico 200. So yeah, go have a look at Kev's video on that. Kev, do you want to post a link to it in my Facebook group? Just reference the live stream that we're talking about it, and then people can go in there and have a look and go and watch it. But not until you finish watching this live stream, right? Understood? Okay, right. Okay, let's carry on. Oh, yeah. Don't forget, add any more questions you've got to the chat, and we come back to Q&A towards the end for anything else that's come in. If you're watching it on the replay, feel free to put them in the comments or email them to me, and I'll bring them into next week. Oh, by the way, whoever asked about sensor cleaning, I still haven't forgotten. Still haven't done anything, but I haven't forgotten on that. Right. 3-minute Lightroom challenge. Let's for anyone who's new and doesn't know how this works, I'm provided with a raw image. I try not to see it beforehand. We get it into Lightroom, we set a timer, and I have 3 minutes to do an edit on it based on that file. Now, we've had images which have required very little, we've had images which have required a lot, and I also challenge Rick Bradbury to do the same. So you get 2 people doing the edit on the same image, and Rick and I always approach this from different angles. So it's quite interesting to see how we do things differently on there. Neither of us know what the other has done. So we do the edits completely independent of each other. So if there is any similarity, it's purely coincidental on there. And believe you me, it doesn't happen very often between us. So it's a great way of seeing how you can take one image and take it in different directions. So tonight we've got a new one. If you do want to take part, get in touch with me. I'll send you the instructions on that. It's really easy. And Tim, I'm going to hold you to providing one to me on there. And everyone else, I'll be chasing you if you've not had one done, because I want to have a few extra faces on there instead of the same old folks each time. Like the images from the folks we've already got, and we will get through them all, those who've supplied them. Don't worry about that. But I would like to try and include some of the newbies in there as well. So here we go with Rick's challenge.
Hello everybody, good evening. My name's Rick Bradbury, and I am recording this Lightroom Edit Challenge video, 3-minute Lightroom Edit Challenge video, ready for Ian's upcoming live streams. In fact, I've even created a new catalogue for it, which is why it's not branded up there. Anyway, just noticed that. So, we have another image by Dimitri, which I think is number 3 that is sent in, so thank you for sending these in. And without further ado, we will hop into Lightroom. And 3 minutes on the clock, there we go. So let's see what we have here. And we'll jump onto this one. There we go. So this is the image as sent raw, no adjustments made. So first thing I'm going to do is get it onto Adobe Standard. There we go, because Adobe Color I do not like. And we will put lens corrections on. There we go. Flattens it out nicely. Lifts any vignetting on the edges, if there were to be any, although at F11 I doubt it. And let's take a look. So this is somewhere in Italy, Rome, Italy. Correct me if I'm wrong. Looks familiar. Looks like it was used, or the area was used to shoot one of the Liam Neeson Taken films. Possibly, I don't know. It just looks familiar. Let me know. So interesting image. Let's take a look. First thing to do, it was shot at ISO 100 f11 on a 24mm lens on a 70D crop sensor camera. Let's get rid of the noise reduction. We don't need that at ISO 100. And let's deal with the horrible color of the lights that are there. So I want to make it a little bit more neutral, and it will neutralize the sky color just a little bit. I do feel the building will retain some warmth under those lights. and we will see what we get there. That looks like a good start. So I'm going to back the exposure off just a little bit, do a little bit of global contrast work, really back the highlights off, although I've only got so much headroom before it looks really muddy. So we'll do those just a little bit, back the whites off a touch. I'm going to up the shadows just for the foreground, and then we'll go to curves just quickly. Definitely need a different mouse in here. There we go. And I want to bring those highlights back down just a little bit. I'm expecting the lights to be bright, as you would. So I'm not overly concerned there. Take a little bit of the vibrance and saturation out. And bring the black levels down just a little bit, just to tighten the contrast levels up a touch. There we go. I've got a minute left, or just under. And then let's do some masking, some detail, radius, little bit of sharpening. Don't want to go nuts. And then we will go to a little bit of texture. We'll probably do a bit more on that actually. And then some clarity, and we should be good to go. So we'll get rid of that information, and we have before, eventually. Wow, that took a while. Before and after. Before and after, although that's not making that big of a change, so the before and after is not quite working. Anyway, that's Lightroom for you folks. So we'll go back to after there. No idea why it's doing that. And that is the 3 minutes up. There we go, shush that up. Okay, just a quick point. This, admittedly, full disclosure, is a redo of this image and recording purely because I made a right mess of it last time. An issue between Lightroom and OBS, or OBS and Lightroom. They weren't playing. So I've had to redo a couple of recordings. So full disclosure on that. But we'll hand back to Ian in the studio, and I will be back shortly with some feedback.
Right, okay. Thanks, Rick, for that. The building is Castel Sant'Angelo in Rome. I know Rick was trying to work out where it was. I know that because I've been there and I have photographed it as well. So nice to see somewhere I've been on there. Right, okay, let's move on. Our theme for tonight is lenses. So here, for the chat, why not add into the chat what's your favorite lens and why? Do you have a favorite lens that you like to use? What do you use it for? Why is it your favorite? I'll tell you now, my favorite lens is my 70-200 f2.8 lens. Cracking lens under low light, brilliant for theatre, sharp as a pin. That lens is all the way across, even at f2.8. I love using it. So go on, what's your favorite lens, folks? Put it in the live chat, or if you're watching on replay, put it in the comments so that I know on there. Right, lenses. As I said earlier, this is perhaps a little bit more beginner level stuff for those who are at the earlier stages in their photography journey. But I want to just look at what is focal length, first of all, and to explain that. Because we talk about it, but perhaps we don't really... It was only when I started teaching that I actually thought, you know, I really ought to try and work out what focal length really is, and to be able to explain it. So I got the definition, and this is what it is. Nice and straightforward. That scientifically, the focal length of a lens is the distance from the lens that light from an object at infinity will converge as a result of passing through the lens to a point of focus. Right, well, I hope you've all got that. So now let's move on to something. No, it's not straightforward, is it? That is the definition that we've got, but let's try and break it down to something a little bit simpler. And the way it's usually described is with a diagram, which looks something like this. Now, at this point, I need to make myself a little bit smaller. down into the corner. And this is how focal length diagrams are often drawn in the textbooks. And I've always found this diagram, or this type of diagram, to be very, very misleading. First of all, you can't draw a subject that's at infinity. It's impossible on there. And secondly, and I'm not quite sure I can show, yeah, I can just about reach and show it. That bit where the two rays cross, that looks as though that's the focusing point. It isn't, it's just the way the diagram is drawn. But maybe there's a better way of drawing it. Maybe we ought to draw it that looks a little bit like this. So we've still got our subject at infinity, and then the light from any given point on that subject will converge and focus on the screen. And the distance away that lens is from the thing it's focusing on is the focal length. So in the case of a camera, it's the distance between, if it was a simple lens, and the sensor or film on there. This breaks down though, of course, because if the subject was at infinity, those two lines ought to be parallel on, can I do it? Yeah, I'll do it with the mouse. On this side of the diagram. So, again, it's not a brilliant way. So it's quite difficult to try and explain this concept. In the end, I think, sorry, I put a slide in that I'd forgotten about. Yeah, so in theory, using that definition and the diagrams, a 300mm lens would be exactly 30 centimeters long, or exactly 30 centimeters away from the sensor. In reality, that's not the case. And the reason is we've got focusing elements in there. We've got, if it's a zoom lens, we've got other elements in to cope with the zooming, and we've got elements which just handle the shortening of the lens to make a lens shorter, to make it work on that. So just because we talk about a focal length doesn't mean that's the physical length of our lens. And that was always something when I first started with photography and I started hearing about the length of a lens in millimeters. I was thinking, how's that's never that same number of millimeters. The reason why is because they are a compound item with multiple lenses in there, multiple bits of glass in there. So what we actually need is a simple definition. And the simple definition that I think just about every photographer works on with it is that focal length is a number expressed in millimeters that represents the area that the lens can cover in terms of creating an image. And the smaller that number, the bigger the area. Now this is typical of photography, isn't it? That everything's upside down, so we get a smaller number to cover a bigger area. Actually, I've got to watch my hand doesn't disappear off the... oh no, did my fingers just go? Yeah, just going off the edge of the screen there. Yeah, so a 28mm lens, small number, wide area. 300mm lens, big number, covers only a small area. That's just the way it is. So if you just think about focal length as being the area that the lens covers, it's a lot more than that. But that's the simple definition. If you're a beginner, think of it in those terms and remember it in those terms, and then you'll know where you're going with lenses. Now, that used to be nice and straightforward back in the film days when we all shot with 35mm film, whether you had a point and shoot camera or an SLR. Now, with the digital world, we have an extra factor that we have to worry about. Crop sensors. Sensors on most cameras are now smaller than they used to be for 35mm photographers. And we refer to a sensor that's the same size as an old bit of 35mm film as being full frame, and everything else as a crop sensor. And what that actually means is that if you imagine a scene in front of you and a 35mm camera could But actually, I don't need to be so small in the corner now, do I? No, I can make myself bigger. If the camera could record that much of it as a 135, because the sensor is smaller, effectively, it's projecting an image onto that area, but you're only actually capturing the middle bit of it. And the amount or the difference between the two, we call a crop factor on there, or a focal length multiplier. And what it appears as though you are shooting with a lens that is of a longer focal length. So here we can see an example. The red box on there would be let's assume that is a full-size sensor. So for example, I have on my 5D Mark III. But then the others are different size crop factors. So ignore the APS-H, because those are very uncommon now. That's the original crop factor for Canon. But we've got things like the APS-Cs on there, the Canon APS-C, which is a 1.6, or the Nikon APS-C, which is 1.5, and those are the blue and green boxes. The yellow box is a crop factor 2, so we're talking with some of the mirrorless cameras have that crop factor on there. So you can see you're only capturing a smaller part of the scene, so your lens is behaving as though it was a longer focal length. So to try and be consistent on this, and so we can compare apples with bananas on it, we use that crop factor to convert everything to a 35mm equivalent. So I'm working at 35mm full frame sensor on mine. So my 50mm lens is a 50mm lens. Somebody working with a Canon, let's see, a 500D, for the sake of argument, has a crop factor of 1.5. So their 50mm lens behaves as though it was a 75mm lens. So you multiply your crop factor by the actual focal length to get the equivalent version. And you'll find even in programs like Lightroom, they actually give you that. And it's a good way of being able to compare the amount of zoom that you've had and one lens with another about how it behaves. As ever with a lot of these things, I've oversimplified a lot of that, but that's a good grounding for you. I'm going to come back to this in a little while, take it on to the next area, which is what focal length works well for what subjects. But before that, let's move on to our next Lightroom challenge, and it'll give me a chance to have a read of all the comments about people's different favorite lenses, because I'm dying to read those. I can see them scrolling up here as I'm trying to talk. It's quite hard to resist looking at them. So while I have a read of that, have a watch at me editing the file. Hello, welcome to another 3-minute Lightroom edit challenge. And I've got an image from photographer Dimitri, and as ever I have 3 minutes to edit the image without having seen it beforehand. So let's get the timer started. Right, what have we got? We've got a night scene, so let's go over to the develop module. And here we go, let's just see the information on here. Right, that's the raw file. So right, it's Castel Sant'Angelo in Rome. I recognize that. So let's just make sure everything's reset, and it is. Again, another night image. This is a night image. I would say taken a little bit too late at night, to be honest. So lens corrections, my normal standard start point, and that has made a big difference to it. Right, we've got blown out highlights. Let's see whether I can recover those with the highlight slider. Bring those down. That's brought them back in on most of them. full screen so you can see. Now see what we can do with the shadows. Try bringing the shadows up. That's going to help. We've still got the muddy sky on there. I'm going to try and treat some of that with a change of the white balance. And by just bringing that down a little bit, that's probably closer to what Dimitri would have experienced, even if it's not accurate on there. Right, how much have we got blown out? Still, no, that's okay. Right, I think, let's have a look on this. Slightly soft, I would say. See what we can bring back with a bit of clarity on it. That will help, and a little bit of dehaze might as well with this. That's looking okay, just a slight tweak to the exposure. Like that. What have we got blown out? Still need to bring down those highlights a bit more. Right, that's not too bad. What about noise on here? Well, not seeing much at all on that. Okay, so sharpening is probably all I need. I've got 45 seconds to do some sharpening on it. And I'm just going to a little bit of noise reduction on there. A bit more on the sharpening and the radius, and then I'll just mask it. Hold down the Alt key and I can see where it's applying. Remember, the white areas are the bits that it's applying to, the blacks are the bits it's not. So that's a bit of sharpening on there. And I think that's about as much as I want to do with it. Can I get rid of a few more of those highlights that are clipping? Don't like them clipping. Oh, and the time's run out. So that's all I could do in 3 minutes on it. And just as the timer went, I was wondering whether a little bit of work in curves might be required for this. Now, I don't know, because obviously I haven't seen Rick's edit on this. I don't know whether he's doing curves on it, but I would tend to go with the point curve. And if I was doing anything, can I just lighten it a little bit? Oh, a bit too much on that. So I don't want these highlights to go out. So, oh, yeah. Oh, I don't know. That's about the best I could do on it with the curves, just as that little bonus on there. So, yep, I'll give feedback on the image later on in the show. So back to me in the studio. Right, and we're back. So, a little bit of an image feedback section. We have a new member on the Facebook group joined this week, Raoul, and he posted a photograph which looks to me as though it's Amsterdam and has asked for some feedback. It's an iPhone photo, and he said, could we please be gentle with him? I know some people have already given some feedback in the Facebook group, but I wanted to just have a look at this myself on there. So, right, let's go over to Lightroom, and yep, there we go. I've got it loaded into Lightroom on here. Right, so a couple of things on this. I'm going to try and keep in mind that this was taken with a phone on there. And now, Raoul, first of all, I hope I pronounced your name right. The things I'm going to do in Lightroom are not necessarily, I would not expect someone to take a phone photo into Lightroom. It just happens to be a handy tool for me to be able to show this as part of the live stream. If you want something to do effects and editing to images in on a phone, then check out an app called Snapseed. Snap as in click, and seed as in plant. It's a free app. It will allow you to do an awful lot of editing to your images, and it will allow you to do things like bringing back detail. You'll see in a minute I'm going to do couple of things with the clarity on here. It will have its own option with details and things like that that you can do. So look at that. There is actually a free version of Lightroom that will run on the mobile phone. It's a little bit restrictive, but you might want to have a look at that as well. But Snapseed would be my go-to app for phone editing. Right, first thing I'm going to say about this is I love the scene. It's a lovely moody sky to it, and I really like skies that look like that. The next thing I like is the reflection, and had you not said that it was a camera phone shot, I would not have actually known that. I'd have said probably on tripod with that that reflection and a long exposure. So I like it even as it is, but I think there's a couple of things we can do which will help it. Now, one is, it's only minor, but I think it does make a difference, and that is the verticals are converging on one side but not on the other. And if we can just straighten everything up, that will just help it very, very slightly. Now, two ways you can do that. You can do it in camera, and the way to do it in camera is to make sure that your camera doesn't tilt down or up, and that you don't have it going side to side on there, and that will help you eliminate that problem. Now, it's not always possible to do that, and you have to do it in post-production. The program I mentioned, Snapseed, will allow you to do it. I'm going to use a similar tool here in Lightroom, and I'm going to use Transform in here, and I'm just going to click Auto, and it will do it auto magically for me. And there we go. It's still slightly in on that side. I can just do a little bit more if I want with the slider. Oh, wrong way. Yeah, something like that it would do. And if I say constrain crop on there. So there, I've got all that set up on that. I'm going to go full screen so you can see things a little bit better with it. So what else would I do with this? Well, I think this is an image all about the reflection. And I know that one of the comments in the Facebook group was, could you wait till the boat had finished going? I think the boat is fantastic on there because that acts as our lead-in line to this. It's our foreground interest, and it's nice and straightforward. I'm less convinced about what's over on the other side. It's nice detail, but I think this image would be more powerful for a crop to make it a little bit more simple, to simplify it. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to crop it, and I'm going to bring in on this side to the edge of the building there, and I'm just going to bring the sky down there and just a fraction off the bottom because I want to keep those reflections. And I think that is a much stronger image, if I've got the verticals right. With that brings our eye into these buildings. The buildings on the waterfront, we've got the boat as our lead-in line, we've got the reflections. Now, it's a strange aspect ratio on there. I could go, if I wanted to, see this as a 1:1 aspect ratio. And that would work with it as well. Doing something like that, a 1:1. That's an interesting sort of crop. But there is another crop in here. If I unlock that, bring that back. As I said, I think this image is all about the reflection. So I'm going to bring in as much of that reflection as I can. And actually, much as I love that sky, I think there's an interesting image here by doing that, which just focuses on the reflection. The reflection becomes our subject then. So there's a possibility there. Let me go back because I do kind of like that sky. I'd like to have that in there. I think that's probably my preferred crop on it. Now, a couple of things I would like to do with an image like this in post-production. You're not going to be able to achieve this directly in camera. but I would like to see a little bit more detail in the sky. So I'm going to do that with a little bit more on the clarity slider, bring that up, a little bit more on the texture slider. I'd love to get a bit more up there. I'm just going to do this. In Lightroom, I'm going to do it with a graduated filter. In the likes of Snapseed, if you apply a detail filter on there, that will boost that sky for you in there. But I think there's something else we can do in this. Let's reset, oops, reset all of those. I'm just going to bring that down along there. And with that, what I want to do, I'll boost the saturation a little bit on there. And I want to bring it a little bit on the dehaze. I can't go too far because we're starting to get a posterization with it, a little bit more on the clarity. And it just makes that sky a little bit more moody. Now, one final thing looking at this, which I probably should have done earlier, but didn't, and that is your white balance. And again, you can do this in post-production with Snapseed. I want to make, that was what was true white, so I'm going to select that, and I think that's more like the color that the image should be. But let me head back to out of Lightroom and to here. I would say, in summary, Raoul, it's a cracking shot, one that you can be proud of. The things I have mentioned are not a criticism of it, they are suggestions for other things that you could have done. And as ever with any scene like this, I would always recommend that you, well, we use the term work the scene. So you take this shot as your beginning shot maybe. And then you think, well, what would have happened if I'd have turned the phone through 90 degrees and done a long, thin shot? What would have happened if I'd have zoomed right in and just picked out a detail? What would have happened if I had moved a couple of paces to the left or to the right? And things like that. So those are things I would encourage you to think about with your photography on there. I hope that's helpful. I'm guessing that you're watching this on the replay. If you are, please put a comment so that I know you've seen it, because that will encourage me to do these sorts of things more often. So thanks for allowing me to talk about it as well. And do let me know whether it is Amsterdam. I think it is. It looks kind of familiar to me, having been to Amsterdam a few times on my travels. So let's move on. And lenses again. What lens is best for what subject? This will be fairly quick to go through, actually, even without me rushing and speaking at double speed. The one thing you need to remember is I am talking 35mm equivalents on this. So it's, as I said before, that if you've got a 50mm lens with a 1.5 crop factor, we're talking 75mm, not what it says on the lens of 50mm. We're talking about that equivalence value with all of these. So let's go through the ranges. A typical focal length, anything in 35mm equivalents that's less than 21mm is normally referred to as an extreme wide angle lens. And so the cameras that have this, okay, yes, you can buy them for your SLRs, your mirrorless and things like that. A little bit harder on some of the crop factors for it, although they do make 10mm lenses, 8mm lenses for those. But things like GoPro are in this range. A lot of compact cameras, however, don't have it. You just don't quite get out this wide with it. So what would you use that sort of lens for? Well, architecture is really where extreme wide angles come into their own, where you're in a confined space and you want to make it look larger. Especially if you're shooting for a client. Typically, if I was doing a shoot for, say, a travel firm, they want their accommodation to look as big and as spacious as possible. And I'll be perfectly honest with you, I've used the same technique with photos of my studio. If you have a look at the standard photograph I show of the interior of the studio, when I first opened it, 9.5 years ago, I took it with a wide angle lens to make the place look bigger than it actually is. So we all do it. As photographers, we accept and know that it happens, but they're great for architecture work, both for interiors and for exteriors, so you can get the whole building in. This was one of the things I found when I went to the Middle East, at a point when I couldn't do extreme wide angles. I was missing shot after shot because I simply couldn't get back far enough to capture all the Egyptian temples. So next up, after your extreme wide angles, we've got a range of 21mm to 35mm. Again, 35mm equivalent values on here. And we describe this simply as a wide angle lens. And this is typically what you have on your compact cameras when they're zoomed out, if you want some comparison on it. Lenses obviously on your interchangeable cameras with interchangeable lenses, it'll be written on there as to what it is on there. What do we use it for? Well, that's your landscape photography lens. Typical lens for that, and they really work well for it. It allows you to capture that whole vista that's in front of you. And we talked a little bit about that a few weeks ago in one of the previous live streams. So if you're interested in landscape photography, go and check that live stream out. I gave a lot of information and advice on landscape photography on that. Next up is in the range 35mm to 70mm. This is the mid-range. This is where our nifty 50 lenses fit in. And we call these lenses a normal lens. Why do we call it normal lens? Well, back in the day, the standard lens that you got on a camera that wasn't interchangeable was approximately 50mm. And the reason it was 50mm because that's approximately the field of view that we have as human beings. So it simulates our viewpoint. So it's our normal point of view. So it's a normal lens. What do we use it for? Well, it's the midpoint on our compact cameras and things like that. And we just use it for general use. It's a good standard position for there on that. Next up, we go 70 to 135mm, and this is what we call a medium telephoto lens. And if you've got a compact camera, it's typically about 2/3 to 3/4 of the way through your view range is where you want to be to get that. And this is used for portraiture. Fantastic sort of range to be for portraiture, because it doesn't flatten the features too much, but it doesn't distort the features. So it gives a good representation, a flattering representation of your subject. So it's generally what I advise in the studio for portrait, typically sort of waist up type framing on there. Next, beyond there is anything over 135mm is what we call a telephoto, as opposed to the medium telephoto. And that would be on a compact camera, a fully zoomed in lens on there would be that sort of area. It's also your typical lens that you would use for wildlife or sports photography. And here we've got one of the few images that I give a title to. You want to know what it is? It's called My Hero. Right, let's have a look at some of your images then that have been published in my in the Facebook group during the week. And we start with Mr. Prolific himself, Gary Platt. And this, correct me if I'm wrong, Gary, but I included this because you said it was taken with a 13mm lens. And it was only after I put it in, I thought, hang on a minute, he's got a crop factor 2 on his camera. If I'm wrong on that, and that was genuinely 13mm, do let me know in the chat, because if it is, I'm really impressed that you've got that with absolutely no distortion on there with it, because 13mm at 35mm equivalents, I'd expect probably to see a little bit of distortion in there on it. But nice shot of a presumably stately home, a banqueting table on there. The only thing I would say with that, a little bit of feedback for you, Gary, is I'd like to see a little bit more work in post-production to bring out the detail in the shadows on it. But I love the setup. I like the racks of things acting as lead-in lines at the top of the image on there, and the symmetry of it. That all works nicely on that. So thank you for sharing that one. Another one from Gary, and I don't want to say too much about this, but this actually was a bit of a debate in the forum from a couple of people. It's Gary posted it as an image to illustrate bokeh, and I think it's a really good illustration of bokeh. But I think what people were bothered about was the fact that the tree was out of focus with it. You can't do it. Right. Oh, genuine no crop factor on it. I've just spotted Gary's response on there. Yeah, nice shot then to get that without any distortion. Okay, yeah, back to the Christmas tree on here. It's an interesting one. It's a lovely bokeh shot, and a little bit of feedback on this. I'm torn with it. I kind of like it, but I kind of wish there was just something in the foreground on it. Just to offset the bokeh with it. Sometimes an image that's just bokeh can work, but one of the things you've got to be careful with bokeh is the things which are out of focus can be a little bit, they can draw you away from it, because we're immediately looking at this and I'm trying to see the tree behind. I'm going to talk a bit more about bokeh next week when we talk about distortion with our lenses, and whilst it's not the distortion I was originally planning on, it just feels a good place to cover bokeh as well. So I'm probably going to talk about bokeh a bit more next week on that. Moving on to some that Ben posted. Again, some lovely images, Ben. Thanks for keeping on submitting. I hope your mojo is coming back. We had a discussion in the group a few weeks ago about getting your mojo back. Going back to, again, this is the problem with chat. It's the delay on there. It was a bokeh experiment. It was a good experiment, worth trying it. I'll talk about next week. Just going back to that, Gary. A little trick you might want to try with something like that, where you can actually change the shape of the bokeh circles. And I'll talk about that next week. And what would have been really fun with that one, which would have worked, would be use that technique, I'll talk about it next week, to actually make the bokeh circles look like miniature Christmas trees. And it is possible. Anyway, back to Ben's image on here. Nice shot. I like the point of focus on it. This is one of those where you either want that full depth of field using the hyperfocal distance as we've talked about a few weeks ago, or if you can't achieve that, using a focal point close to, which is what Ben has done. He's focused on the very front of the boat. Love the lighting on it. I like the vignette. I know there is one viewer on here who gets who I don't know whether he's doing a drinking game on how many times I talk about vignettes on these shows, but I know he's waiting for it every week. So nice vignette on there. The only thing I don't like is that loss of the very bottom of the boat at the bottom of the frame. It'd be nice to take it down just slightly to get the whole boat in. This one of Ben's, I think, is a cracking shot, a wonderful shot. It shows bokeh, it shows the depth of field in there, that sharp foreground interest, that lovely light in the background, nice framing on the leaf on there. It just ticks all the boxes. It's an abstract image that tells a story. It's autumn, it's the fading autumn lights, or it's the lights on the cars or the lamppost or whatever in the background, and it just tells the story. Wonderful shot, Ben, and really just thank you for sharing that. I just wanted other people to see it as well. And Andy has been sharing some of his bird images. This is the reason why I was trying to get Andy, slightly teasing earlier in the chat, for one of the 3-minute edit challenges. Some really nice shots here. Love the goldfinch on this. Lovely and clear. I know the way I've got it set up on here, I can't show you, but it's lovely and sharp on there. If I have one slight nitpick on this one, it's those bright areas up on the top right that are kind of drawing the eye a little bit. So it might be worth a vertical crop on this to kind of reduce that down, so the focus is more on the goldfinch on there. That was a nitpick. This next one of Andy's, I've got nothing but praise for. Lovely, sharp song thrush, I think, not sure, but it's got everything to do with what we're talking about with lenses here. We've got the bokeh in the background, shallow depth of field, telephoto obviously on this. Really, really sharp image. And then the bush in the foreground just going out of focus as well. It sort of leads you through the image. And yeah, wonderful shot, Andy. Well done on there. A final one of Andy's is peacock. I like peacock images like this. I have a couple in my own collection on there. I know they're a swine because they keep turning around when you're trying to photograph them, but I'd like to have seen this perhaps from a pace or two to the left, just so that the peacock was a little bit more central in its own feathers on there, on that. But that's a nitpick more than anything on that. And I've got to share this one of Peter's. I've given it a title now. As far as I'm concerned, this image will now forevermore be known as ... and now run. Because for all the world, it looks like this bull or cow is heading straight for the photographer. Peter has explained that he was on a roadside, and it was one of these where the field's raised up, so he was standing but at ground level with it. So we got a little bit of hedge or something in the foreground, although it looks like grass. But it works. And one thing I want to say about this, Andy was saying it's female blackbird, the previous one. One thing I want to say about this is, no pun intended, but you've bullseyed the subject, which normally is something I say don't do. But for this one, occasionally when you put a subject bang in the middle, it works. And this one really does work in the middle. And I tried to imagine it moved on to one of the thirds lines, and I don't think it works. So right composition decision on this. It's one of the few times where putting your subject in the middle really does work. So well done, Peter, on that. What else have we got? Oh yes, the Lightroom 3-minute challenge. We're getting near the end now. So Rick's feedback. How are we doing for time? Oh, I've overrun again. Anyway, let's have Rick's feedback and then I'll do mine briefly and we'll wrap up.
Well, there we go, back with some feedback. So thank you very much, Dimitri, for sending this in again. I am going to probably create a virtual copy, and I'll just yellow label it by hitting number 7, and I'm going to do a reset. But the before and after wasn't working in Lightroom before. It may have picked up some XMP file from the previous attempts, I don't know. Anyway, so obviously we can see the original's very, very warm. Now it's coming in raw, so you probably shot this on auto white balance, I imagine, knowing how warm that kind of light can get on auto white balance on a Canon camera. And it's fine, in raw, we can change that. But obviously it just looks a bit too warm to taste. Now, maybe they were kind of warm to the eye, but I just think it takes away from the building, to be honest with you. That's why I neutralized the color a little bit. So having a look at the reset file, I'll just get rid of noise reduction. Now we can see on the original that it's not critically sharp, but it's not the end of the world. Now, a couple of things I think are happening here. The camera's not completely steady. Now, I don't think you handheld this at 30 seconds. If you did, that's impressive. How did you do it? But it was possibly staged on a tripod, or maybe even resting on a wall, maybe a camera beanbag. A couple of ways you can do it, of course, be it normal tripod or kind of hacking something together using a wall if you don't have one with you. Now, however, if you do get a little bit of movement either from the wind blowing the camera around, or maybe if you're set up on a wall or a tripod and you're on a road or a bridge and there's traffic going by, those vibrations are going to mess you up a little bit. Also, make sure, because you had a 24-105 IS image stabilized lens, I don't know whether it was on or it was off, but if IS is left on, it can trip it up and actually give you a softer image. The only time I'd use IS on a tripod is if it's in very, very, very harsh windy conditions and the camera's kind of really being buffeted around. Generally speaking, it's off when it's on a tripod. Now, another thing that's contributing to the softness a little bit, and again, it's not a deal breaker. I don't want to sound like I'm digging you too much on this, but it's f11. You can probably get away with opening up a little bit at that distance on a crop sensor camera and still maintain a good, healthy depth of field. You're probably best opening up to 7.1 f8. You start to go to f11, you're well within the diffraction limiting aperture ranges on that format of sensor. The 24-105, whilst it's not a bad lens, isn't the sharpest lens in the toolkit necessarily. So just mitigating diffraction would help with sharpness. So what we'll do, we'll go back to the edited image so you can see the lens profile. Boom, deals with the issue in that corner down there, so a little bit of the wall sticking out, fine. And that is my edit there. Now, I've done some color correction. I kind of like the warmth that's still within the building, certainly versus the cold sky, dusk, and the cold light, uplight on this building in the background here. They contrast well, and I do like the framing on this. So if we go to the crop tool, it just works for me. I've brought up the shadows to, let me go to that. Brought up the shadows to show some of the foreground information, and it's very good that we've got a relatively still river here, so we can show the reflection. Otherwise that foreground is just going to go totally black, and there's nothing there really. There's just a ton of negative space, which could be used for copy, a design element or something certainly, but this certainly adds to it. Otherwise you've got a lot of dead space here and then a whole lot of this going on in the middle. So compositionally I do like it. I'm not sure whether we should have seen at the top of the flagpole, I don't know what's on top of it, maybe there was nothing, but that being cut off bugs me maybe a little bit. Now I probably would have shot this a little darker myself, so I probably would have gone down another third on the shutter speed, so speed that shutter speed up a little bit just to knock those highlights down a touch in camera, maybe 1 or 2/3. Gives you a bit more wiggle room because you can push a little further in post than you can pull in these scenarios. But overall, a nice shot. I'd certainly like to go and have a wander around there myself, take some portraits, have a wander around looking at the architecture. It looks like a nice place to have a walk around. Granted, we can't really travel a whole lot at the moment, but certainly a good place. I can see some great places for some portrait work around there. Overall, nicely done. Thank you very much for sending it in. Again, I apologize, I'm having to kind of redo this due to the faux pas on the previous attempt, technical glitch or user error, probably more accurate. So what we'll do now, we'll hand back to Ian in the studio.
Right, thanks Rick for the very comprehensive feedback on there. I haven't got that much to add. The couple of things I would add to it is, yes, it is a nice place to walk around. I do like Castle Sant'Angelo, and that whole area with the bridge and the angels on it is a lovely place. Very difficult to do any portraiture there because it is so crowded. But feedback on the image. The main thing I would like to feed back on, Dimitri, is the time. Now, we talked about night photography in a previous one of these live streams. There's a magic time for doing night photography, and that is 20 minutes after official sunset time, and it lasts for about 20 minutes. At least that's the timing in the UK. The further south you go, the shorter that 20 minutes is, and in terms of how quick it happens after sunset and how long it lasts for. By the time you get down as far as Rome, it's probably going to be about 15 minutes, something like that. But it's it needed to be that little bit earlier, which is what's caused the problems with some of those blown out highlights, because as Rick said, it was just that little bit hot on the image, a little bit too bright on there, because the darkness of the sky was overpowering it. If you'd gone that little bit earlier with it, the sky would have been that wonderful blue colour on there, and the blue and the orange from the lights on the buildings work very nicely together. They are contrasting colours, opposite sides of the colour wheel, and they work well together, and that's why a lot of night shots work at that time of day, because you get that lovely contrast there. So that's my main feedback on it, is just choose the time a little bit better. Rick's already picked up about that slight softness, which we don't know whether that was because of how it was being held, or whether it's got on tripod and got image stabilization left on. But that's about all I want to say on it, because I think Rick covered most of the bases on that for it. So let's just finish off. What else have we got in chat? There was something in chat. Yeah, talking about camera shake, a question from Tim Cosford, and I think this is an important one which follows on from both the critique and what we were saying about focal length. The rule for hand holding, as I'm sure you all know, is 1 over the focal length of the lens, except when you have got a crop factor involved. It's 1 over the focal length 35mm equivalents. So going back to our fictitious 50mm lens on a Nikon with a crop factor of 1.2, if it was on a full frame camera, you have to be a 50th of a second or faster to hand hold. On a crop factor camera, 1.5 crop factor, it behaves as though it is a 75mm lens. Therefore, you need to be at 1/75th of a second or faster to avoid camera shake. Yeah, and Dimitri has just confirmed image stabilization was probably on. It was on a tripod. Yep. And I've just read his follow-on comment. It was too busy eating and drinking at sunset. Oh, come on, Dimitri, call yourself a photographer. Eating and drinking secondary, photography first. Come on. Even photographers have to be prioritize images over drink. Come on. Right. Okay. Yeah. You do have to take, in answer to Tim's question, yes, you take into account the crop factor. You do not ignore it on there. So, right. What else? New images in the Facebook group. Yes, we have. Whilst we've been talking, Loz has been posting some images, and this one to illustrate shallow depth of field of pencils. Hang on, you lot can't see it, whereas I can. Right, so there we go. Actually, I'll do that, you can see it a lot better. Yeah, close-up of pencils illustrating depth of field. Nice shot, nice abstract on there, on it. Only bit of feedback I would make, Loz, is sharpen your pencils first. Some of them are decidedly blunt on there. And if you're doing an image about sharpness, it would be nice to actually have the points and the sharp points actually on the on the image. But that's a nitpick. I love the composition on it, well framed and everything, and it does show that shallow depth of field really nicely on there. Similarly with this one, and this I really do like, that shallow depth of field as everything just disappears off into blur on there. It's a fantastic sort of abstract shot. So well done, and thank you for sharing that in the group. So I think that's it. I will just have a final quick check, make sure nothing else has gone in. No, I've gone to the wrong page anyway. Forget that. I think we're done on that. So that just takes us to the wrap up for the show. And as ever, thank you all for watching. Thanks to Rick for doing the 3-minute challenge with me. Thank you for everyone who's submitted images, both in the Facebook group and for Dimitri for the 3-minute challenge on there, and for Raul for allowing me to critique his image as well on it. And as ever, subscribe if you aren't already subscribed. Comment on the videos, it does help, and like. Right, talking of liking, let's have a look. There's 20 of you watching, there's only 12 of you liking it. That means there's 8 of you, there's 21 of you watching now. That means there's 9 of you who don't like this thing. So go on, get on and like it on there. And next time we are going to be looking at distortion and foreshortening is the main thing. So if you've got images which are distorted, similar to the one you can see on there, or foreshortening where you make things look closer together, particularly share those in the group. But as I'm going to add in bokeh as well, if you've got bokeh images, I know we had a couple this week, do share those as well, and I'll pick up a few bokeh ones next week on that. So that brings me to the end, and as ever folks, thanks for watching, and until next time, keep making great photos, and I'll see you next week. Bye for now. Right, now I need to do the alternative ending for when this is a cut down version. Thanks for watching this cut down version of Ian's Studio Live. You've seen some of the highlights. If you want to see the full stream, do subscribe to my Photo Academy. It's only £6 a month or £60 a year. And not only do you get the full streams, you get a load of resources to help you with your photography. So the link's down below here. Go and have a look at that, and hopefully I'll see you in the Academy. But once again, thanks for watching folks, and until next time, keep making great photos. Bye for now.